In this video, I'll be discussing the organizational strategies that you can use for speech number 3. Please remember that speech number 3, the purpose of it is to persuade your audience to make some sort of change of policy, behavior, or action in order to solve some problem. And to that end, we've constructed speeches around a central claim of policy. So our thesis statement for these speeches were to be policy claims that indicated a problem and then advocated a solution for it. And with that in mind, all of the organizational strategies that we can choose from for speech number 3 are based on a simple problem solution body of the speech or one of its close variations. And I'll talk about the 3 choices that we have for organizational strategies in just a second. But for right now, I want to turn to just a look at the basic structure that all of the persuasive speeches should follow. And this is no different than what we did in speech number 2. So I'm just emphasizing here that no matter which organizational strategy you choose for organizing the body of your speech, all of the speeches that we'll be doing for this assignment will include these basic elements. To begin with, we'll be using a basic organizational strategy of introduction, body, and conclusion. And the introduction will have the 5 parts that we used in speech number 2. Those will also be used in this speech. Just to review very quickly, as I have in previous videos, the 5 parts of the introduction are an attention getter, something interesting and creative that signals the audience towards the problem, most likely, that you'll be talking about. Think about doing something interesting, something creative for the attention getter. The thesis statement is your central claim. You've most likely turned in a central claim at this point or are in the process of revising your central claim. So you should use the central claim that was approved in that assignment. But your thesis statement is your central claim of policy. The audience orientation is the third thing that you'll likely do in the introduction, and that's where you give the audience a reason to listen. And I'd like you to consider making that actionable so that you're identifying something that the audience will actually be able to do or put into action after listening to your speech. So try to make that action oriented. The 4th part of the introduction is the ethos, where you explain to your audience your credibility given the topic. Again, there are really 2 approaches to that: your own personal experience, as well as naming specific credible sources that you've used to support your argument and to give you data for the claims, evidence for the claims that you're making in this speech. The 5th thing you'll do in the introduction, of course, is to preview the main points of the speech. And the preview statement should be a very clear, direct statement of each of the main points in the order that you plan to talk about them. So first I will discuss X, then I will discuss Y, and finally Z. So that would be a good preview statement. You'll have transitions between each of the major sections of your speech, as well as between each of the main points of the bodies of your speeches. The bodies of the speech will either have 2 or 3 main points, depending on the organizational strategy that you end up choosing. And I'm only highlighting here the main points themselves. Of course, you will need to develop these and offer subpoints and supporting materials to flesh these ideas out. And the main time on the speech will be spent developing this body. So it's not just 2 sentences, obviously. Transitions between the main points and then a transition into the conclusion of the speech. You'll begin the conclusion by signaling to your audience that the speech is coming to an end so that they are psychologically prepared for the speech to be wrapping up. and then you'll review the main points of the speech. You'll kind of summarize your argument. And remember that I've encouraged you to make these reviews more substantial than the previews were, since you have talked about all the information at this point. And the final thing you'll need to do in your conclusion of your speech is to have a final prepared, memorable line that you practice and are able to deliver so that the speech ends on a strong note. So regardless of which organizational strategy you use, this will be the basic structure of all the speeches, and these are the things that you should have in all of your speeches, no matter which strategy you choose. So here are the strategies that you can choose from. You can use for speech number 3 one of these 3 strategies that you see here. Make sure you choose one, you identify that you've chosen that on the top of your outline, and that you actually end up using that strategy to organize your speech. So the first strategy that you can use that I'll discuss here in a moment is problem solution. And problem solution would have 2 main points. A statement of the problem would be main point number 1, and a statement of the solution would be main point number 2. The second strategy you can choose, problem cause solution, which I'll also be referring to as effect cause in solution, essentially breaks the problem up into 2 different parts. The effects of the problem is the first part, the second part, the causes of the problem, and then the third part of the body, the third main point of the body, are the solutions or the solution to the problem. And the third strategy that I'll be discussing in this video is Monroe's motivated sequence, which I highly recommend that you consider using for this speech. Technically, Monroe's motivated sequence has 5 steps to it, or parts to it. However, the 3 middle parts, or the 3 middle steps of Monroe's motivated sequence, make up the body of the speech. So a Monroe's motivated sequence speech has 3 main points in the body of the speech. So you'll choose one of these, and you'll either be using 2 main points if you choose the first one, or 3 main points if you choose either the second or third strategy that you see here. So let's start with the first strategy of problem solution. And I just want you to keep in mind that as I'm discussing these, how you go about organizing and supporting the main points with different subpoints is ultimately going to be left up to you. That is to say, when I'm grading your use of the organizational strategy, I'll just be checking to see that the main points you have written and identified as main points of the body of the speech match the organizational strategy that you choose. How you go about organizing the subpoints and supporting the main points with supporting materials and subpoints is ultimately not something that I'm going to grade. So you can mix and match my suggestions for what you should do for the subpoints from the various different organizational strategies. And for this first one, I've started with just really not very much suggestion for what you do, leaving a lot of how you support this up to you as a artist and a researcher to decide. So I'm not giving you many suggestions for subpoints here. But a basic problem solution speech would have 2 main points. The first main point would clearly state the problem, and it would do so in a concise, not too wordy. Remember, you have to be able to reproduce this and say this. So a concise and very direct single sentence. So in one sentence, state the problem in a way that's very clear. There should be no mystery to the audience what the problem is. You're going to name it directly. And then in the rest of that main point of the body of the speech, you would have several different subpoints that would try to support that problem, explain that problem, and alert the audience to the problem by giving various different evidence, data, supporting materials that show the various causes of the problem, as well as its negative effects. So you want to explain to us the scope and nature of the problem, why it exists, and now that it exists, what kind of harm is it doing in the world? What are the negative effects? How you go about organizing that or crafting that is ultimately up to you. I'll have some more specific suggestions for how you might develop the problem in upcoming slides. Main point number 2 of a problem solution speech, of course, is to state the solution. And again, you want to do that in a concise, direct, single sentence. There should be no mystery what you are claiming we should do to solve the problem. And then in the rest of that section of the speech, main point number 2, you will explain the solution. You'll have to teach us, what does the solution entail? How will it be carried out? What is the plan of action for the solution? And then you'll urge the audience to adopt that solution by providing us evidence that the solution is actually effective, that it's feasible, that it's possible to do the solution. And so you would be trying to show us with data, with evidence, that the solution could work. Okay, so that's a real basic strategy here. 2 main points, and I really didn't explain much about what you might do for the sub-points. And so as we move on to the other 2 strategies, I'm going to give some more suggestions for what you might do with the sub-points. And just keep in mind, you can mix and match these. Just make sure the main points align with the strategy that you're choosing. So that if you choose this next strategy, problem, cause, solution, you should have 3 main points to the body of your speech. The first main point would be to state the negative effects of the problem. So when this strategy refers to the problem as the first main point, we're really dealing here with the negative effects. What's the harm that the problem is causing? You know, who is it hurting? How is it hurting things? What's wrong? So what I've suggested here for your subpoints is that perhaps one of the things you might do when organizing the subpoints would be to use one of the strategies we used last time, which is topical organization, and to begin by talking first about negative effect number 1, then negative effect number 2, providing evidence for the existence of these things, and fleshing this out throughout this section. So that would be a topical organization of the subpoints. For the second main point of a problem, cause, solution, you would of course state the causes of the problem. And again, I've suggested for the subpoints that perhaps you'll take a topical approach to them and start with cause number 1 and then go to cause number 2, providing supporting materials and evidence to show why the problem exists. And then lastly, the main point number 3 of a problem, cause, solution speech, of course, would be to state the solution or solutions. And again, you could topically organize this, taking it solution by solution and showing how each of the parts of the solution or how the solution will be effective, providing evidence for that. The reason you might want to do a topically organized set of sub-points for a speech like this would be, ideally, if you're able to make solution number 1 here align with cause number 1, so that solution number 1 is addressing cause number 1. And same thing for solution number 2. Perhaps solution number 2 is aligned with cause number 2. And if you can keep this the whole way through, perhaps you have cause number 1 leads to effect number 1, and cause number 2 leads to effect number 2. And that gives you nice parallel structure, which will not only help you memorize and reproduce the speech, it will also help the audience follow along, and it will give you an opening to demonstrate that you're solving the problem at its root causes, which is really an effective way to solve a problem, right? Is to tackle it at its root causes. So that's one possibility for how you might organize the subpoints for a problem, cause, solution, speech. Regardless, if you choose this strategy, you're going to have three main points: the negative effects, the causes, and finally, the solutions. How you organize the subpoints is ultimately up to you. What you would be doing in each of these sections would be explaining and providing evidence and supporting materials for each of these things. The last strategy that I highly recommend that you consider using for this speech is called Monroe's motivated sequence. And Monroe's motivated sequence has 5 major steps to them, and you see them here in black. They're labeled in black: attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. But keep in mind that the middle 3 steps, need, satisfaction, and visualization, are the 3 main points of the body of the speech. The first step, attention, would be where your attention getter goes. Essentially, Monroe is asking you to start with an attention getter, which I've already assigned, so all of the speeches should have attention getters that would achieve the first step of Monroe's motivated sequence. And the last step of Monroe's motivated sequence is the action step, and that would go basically where your memorable end to your speech is. It would be the final call to action, the final push at the end of your speech, the last thing that you say. So Monroe's motivated sequence is very similar to a problem-solution speech. The big difference is that when Monroe put this together, he wants us to think about how human motivation works and what it takes for us to actuate a change of behavior. It takes a lot of motivation. We have to be able to see ourselves actually doing something before we take up that action or make that change. An object at rest has a tendency to stay at rest. And so Monroe's motivated sequence is designed to appeal to human psychology and motivation. So let me explain each of the parts really quickly here, and then I'm going to expand upon this and show you what you might do for the subpoints of a Monroe's motivated sequence speech. But here you see the 5 main steps. The attention is the attention getter, and that's going to come in the introduction, and it's just going to be like the attention getters that we're already doing. Monroe says we want to grab our audience's attention and alert them towards the problem, because the problem is the thing that is causing harm, or it's the harm, it's the bad stuff, and so we're more likely to attend to that. Then once you have your attention getter, you would do the other 4 parts of the introduction, just like you would do for all the speeches, no matter which strategy you're choosing. In the body of your speech, you start with main point number 1 by stating the need. Now, the need, for our purposes, you could just think of this as the problem. The need is essentially the problem. Monroe is using the term need because he wants us to get our audiences to think about the problem not as something that's like far away, out there, or abstract, but something that's akin to a personal need, either a psychological or social or personal need that each and every one of us has. He wants you to get the audience to feel like they need to do something, that something is wrong and it directly impacts them. So that's the goal of the need section, to state the problem and connect it to the audience. The second main point of Monroe's motivated sequence is satisfaction. And for our purposes, we can think of the satisfaction as being synonymous with the solution. So now that you've established this personal need in each and one of our audience members, now can you offer a way to satisfy that personal need? Can you give us a solution to the problem? And so in this section, you'll show how you have a solution that will satisfy this personal need that the audience has. The third section, the third main point of Monroe's motivated sequence is actually kind of what makes it unique, and it's called a visualization section. And what I really like about the visualization section is that it really doesn't require any outside research to do. It's actually kind of an exercise in creative writing, and it's a really excellent place to put in some pathos, some emotional appeals into our speeches. But in the visualization section, what we're doing is we are having our audiences imagine themselves implementing the solution. So having them picture it and kind of vividly guiding them through that visualization of actually achieving the solution. And it should be very descriptive, it should be very vivid, it should really place the audience there so that they can see themselves successfully doing whatever action you're asking them to do. We could also use a negative visualization in this section where we have the audience imagine that the problem persists, that they have not implemented the solution, and now they are facing the costs of the problem. They are hurting in some way, they are losing in some way, and the visualization section will take us vividly through that feeling of shame, regret, disappointment that we might feel when we don't implement the solution. And the visualization section, I think, can be really powerful and interesting if you really commit to it and try to do it well. If you are going to kind of keep it half-baked or kind of as an afterthought, visualization is perhaps not that effective. But if you really commit to it as a kind of creative writing act, a putting of the audience into a scene, then it can be really productive. The last part of Monroe's motivated sequence comes in the conclusion of the speech, at the very end of the speech. You'll still have the other two parts of the conclusion, signaling the end and reviewing your argument in some detail. But the final line of the speech will be a final push to action. And I can see this kind of going one of two different ways for your speeches. And it really depends upon the satisfaction. For some of you, your solution will be a really personal solution. You're going to be asking each and every audience member to do something in particular. For example, if I was trying to persuade my audience to solve the problem of health issues by adopting a vegetarian diet, the satisfaction, the solution would essentially be asking my audience to take some action themselves. And so my action step would really just try to get my audience to take those first practical steps towards adopting a vegetarian diet. Maybe I would encourage them to go home and cook a vegetarian meal. I might want to provide my audience with a recipe for their first meal, and maybe I could hand that out to them as a part of my call to action. But in the case of a personal-based solution, the action and the satisfaction are going to be very similar. You might think about wording them in a slightly different way. However, some of your solutions, some of your satisfactions are going to be asking for some audience that's not actually present to do something. And this is when you don't have a personal solution, but your solution is organizational or institutional or a government-based solution. So you're going to be asking the state of Nevada to change the laws, for example. The audience members can't really leave and just go act on that and pass a law right when they leave your speech, unless, of course, they sit in the Nevada legislature. So if they're not in the Nevada legislature, what can they do to take action? That's what I want you to consider here in the conclusion. What are some small, practical steps that the audience can take to try to get this legislation passed? Perhaps you want them to make a phone call, in which case you might want to hand out a piece of paper with a phone number on it to tell your audience to call the Secretary of State. Or maybe you want them to join a group that is working towards getting this legislation passed. And you want to tell your audience, join the Sierra Club of Nevada. What kinds of small practical actions? Maybe it's voting a certain way, maybe it's signing a petition, maybe it's just talking to your friends and family about the problem. What small particular action could the audience take to forward the solution? So that's the basic parts of Monroe's motivated sequence. It has 5 steps: attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. And the 3 in the middle occur in the body of the speech: the need, satisfaction, and visualization. I want to take a moment now to show you a resource that is going to be very useful for you. I have a handout, and oops, let me close that. I have a handout, and you can find it in the modules. Here's the video we're watching under Arranging Persuasive Speeches. Below that, you'll find the handout called Monroe's Motivated Sequence, expanded version with subpoints. And below that, you also want to know about the sample student persuasive speech, full content, full sentence outline, which uses the Monroe's Motivated Sequence that's described in this one here. So I'm going to show you these 2 right now. I won't talk about them in whole, so please take a look at them on your own and consider using this strategy for your speech. But here we go. This is the expanded version of Monroe's motivated sequence. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see the whole thing here. But you'll see that it has the 5 parts: attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. And to this, I have added suggestions for what you might do with the subpoints of the speech. And this is a really great guide for how you might gather materials and begin plugging it into the speech so that you end up with a really well-rounded, holistic speech. So I'll quickly go through this, focusing on the main points. Main point number 1, the need. Begin by stating the need concisely in a single sentence. The next thing you might do would be to elaborate the need by explaining its causes. Illustrate the need by giving a concrete example. Can you give us a particular person that's facing this problem? Can you give us an example of the problem being enacted in real life, in the flesh? Can you personalize this need and make it specific? Explain the ramifications of the need would be to talk about the negative effects. What's the harm being done by the problem? And then personalize the need by showing that the need is connected to the audience. And for some of you, this is going to be pretty easy if your audience is obviously connected to the problem. Let's say you're talking about a college student problem to a bunch of college students. It's not going to be that hard for them to see the need. I still want you to explain how they're connected to it. But this is going to be even more important when you're talking about something that doesn't involve the audience that's gathered directly. For example, let's say I wanted to make a claim that we should have more after-school programming for middle school children. Now, most of your audience is likely not middle school children, so you're going to have to do some work to show why these people in this audience might care about what middle school children are doing after school. And so you might say, well, some of you have children, and for you, it's very clear what you have at stake in this problem. But for those of you who don't have children, think about the other young people in your life, your siblings, your cousins, any other young person that you know. Don't you care about their well-being? And certainly there are young people in your neighborhood. And do you really want these young people in your neighborhood just wandering around with nowhere to go after school, potentially ending up on your property? So even if you don't have children, after-school programming can affect you in so many ways. Okay, so that's what I did. I personalized the need in that sub point. Main point number 2, the satisfaction states the solution. Elaborate the solution. Show how it works. Teach us how it works. Give us the plan of action. Show that the satisfaction meets the need. You said that we have a personal need, that we're connected to the problem. Now show that this solution is going to address that problem directly. Show that the solution is practical, that it's feasible, that we have the resources to be able to do it, that it's cost effective, that we have the skills and know-how to be able to pull it off, that it's worked in another place, and so if it's worked in this other place, then it's likely to work here. That somebody has adopted this solution and it's worked for them. So show us, give us evidence, give us data that supports its practicality. The rebuttal would be, it's an interesting thing, is where you consider, what would be the objections or obstacles that the audience might have when thinking about implementing the solution. What excuses are they going to make to not do it? You want someone to join a gym, they might be thinking that it's going to be too expensive. So you might offer a time of the year where there's a special rate for gym membership, or that you might find some really affordable gyms that your audience could go to. So think about how they'll object or make an excuse to not implement the solution, and then come up with ways to get around those obstacles. For the visualization section, you should ask the audience to imagine or picture possible futures. You can do 2 approaches: positive visualization, where you give the audience an image. Remember, I want this to be very kind of real and vivid, really putting the audience there so that they can imagine themselves in a future where the solution has been implemented. And then negative visualization, a future where it has not been implemented, and really try to evoke the emotions, the feelings of satisfaction or the feelings of disappointment that they might get. Ask your audiences which of these 2 futures would they rather choose. The last step of Monroe's motivated sequence comes in the conclusion, and that would be your memorable end, where you encourage practical steps. Okay, so if you are interested in using this approach, I'd highly recommend it. It gives you a lot to work with and think about in terms of gathering and supporting your argument, gathering materials and supporting your argument with materials. I want to just take one moment and show you the sample student outline here. Ooh, we're zoomed in quite a bit. This is also available in the module. This student is using Monroe's motivated sequence, and they're going to use Monroe's motivated sequence all the way down to the various subpoints, like illustrating the problem, ramifications of the problem, connecting the audience to the problem for each of the points. So this really carries out Monroe's motivated sequence down to the various subpoints. It's a very good example of the kind of outline I'm expecting on your speech. This is an A outline. It does all the things I'm looking for in outline formatting. So you could use this to help you construct and craft your outline for speech number 3. It is editable. And take a look at some of the content in here as it carries out the various parts of Monroe's motivated sequence that I have been talking about. Well, I hope this was a useful video, and I look forward to hearing more about where you're going with these speeches.